Okay, when do rules go bad? Have you ever come across a rule or a law that caused more damage than it did good? Specifically, have you ever encountered a Christian rule or law? Have you ever seen a church in its attempt to be obedient actually cause harm? Have you ever seen a Christian do this? It happens more often than we would like to admit. And if you ever have seen this, or if you've ever been a part of this, maybe you've been victimized by it, maybe you've been the assailant, well, there's good news for all of us in the parable of the Good Samaritan. And that's what we're talking about this week on the live show. Kindred UMC live show features adults discussing adult topics, occasionally with adult language. It may not be suitable for young viewers. Please use discretion before watching. Hello all, welcome once again to the Kindred UMC live show, coming to you not live but pre-recorded from my front room, aka Kindred Studio A. My name is Chris Hayden. I am the pastor of Kindred UMC.
I'm Anne, and I'm everything but clergy for Kindred UMC.
And I'm Preston, and if you know how to make a tire, tell me. And that's it. I got nothing.
I just don't think you're going to have the right tools.
I won't.
In your garage to make a tire. I just don't think that's going to happen.
Well, you can draw it, and then, it's like medieval. You can just draw it on a tree, and then will it
and then
existence.
Pray to whatever God that your family has been sacrificing to for the past.
It out of mud.
All right. So we are in the midst of a look at the parable of the Good Samaritan found in the Gospel of Luke, and that's the Gospel of Luke, chapter and verses. And we have read it before, so I encourage you to go back to the previous videos and read it. Here's the basic summary. Jesus is asked by a young scribe, a lawyer, who hey, what's the most important law? And Jesus says, well, love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and then love your neighbor as yourself. And then the guy kind of wants to catch him a little bit, and he asks, well, then who's my neighbor? And then Jesus tells the story of a Good Samaritan, where a guy gets robbed, beaten half to death, and a priest and all the holy people walk by him. But there's this Samaritan, and Samaritans are bad people. You can have more context if you go look at the other videos. But instead of being bad, he's good. And he picks up the guy, pays for his recovery, and then Jesus ends the whole parable by asking that lawyer, so which one of these was a neighbor? And the lawyer says, the one who did right by him. And go and do likewise. That's the parable. We are going to take a look at all of the different characters in the parable and see if we can learn anything by identifying with them from different angles. And we're going to pair that with some other scriptures. So today we're going to look at the passers-by, the priest and the Levites in the story who cross over to the other side. Now here's a little interesting little tidbit. Do you know why they would cross over to the other side? It's not just because they're jerks, although they are jerks.
It's probably somewhere in the law that it's against.
It's ritually unclean.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
This person's been tainted and they're unclean. So it's not just that they're being jerks. They're adhering to the Pharisaical law. I mean, these are fictional characters because Jesus is literally making up a story. But that is something that would have been understood. They don't cross over to the other side because they just are trying to avoid him. They're crossing over to the other side because he's been made ritually unclean. And if we touch him, there will be a problem. They believe a problem with God. God won't like us anymore because we've touched an unclean thing. So, to just start off our conversation, I'm going to read from the book of Matthew. This is from a section called The Woes. It's basically a sermon that Jesus is giving to people. And I'm only going to read from a section of the Woes because there's a lot of them. So, if you're really curious, you can go to Matthew 23 and read all the woes. But I'm going to read 23 chapter 23, verse 23 through 36. And it goes like this. This is Jesus talking to a crowd, and especially a crowd with scribes and Pharisees. And he says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you tithe mint, dill, and cumin," these are all spices, "and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith." You've tithed spices and you've forgotten justice and mercy and faith. It is these you ought to have practiced without neglecting the others. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. I love that. I like, Jesus can be such a jerk sometimes. He's so mean to these guys. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you clean the outside of the cup and of the plate, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup, so that the outside also may become clean. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. You can pick up a pattern and a rhythm here. For you are like whitewashed tombs, which on the outside look beautiful, but inside are full of bones of the dead and all kinds of filth. So also on the outside you look righteous to others, but inside you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the graves of the righteous. And you say, if we had lived in the days of our ancestors, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. So there's this pattern of like God sending prophets to the people of Israel, and the people of Israel being like, we hate you, and killing them and like torturing them and arresting them. And, he's saying like, yeah, you were the scribes and Pharisees who say, oh, if I was alive, then I would never have done that. I would have been righteous. I would have loved the prophets. I would have listened to the word of God. And so he's kind of like pointing out, if we had lived in the days of our ancestors, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. Thus you testify against yourselves that you are descendants of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your ancestors, you snakes, you brood of vipers. How can you escape being sentenced to hell? Therefore I send you prophets, sages, and scribes, some of whom you will kill and crucify, and some you will flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town, so that upon you may come all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of the righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar. Truly I tell you, all of this will come upon this generation. So, fun little speech he gives. Yeah. It's called the woes, and you can see why. So first of all, does anybody know what a scribe and a Pharisee is?
I was actually going to ask, why is he yelling at the scribes too? Well, Pharisee is an interpreter of the law or the book, and then the scribe is the writer of the...
No.
Okay.
Not quite. So essentially, the biggest difference is that a scribe is the priest, and a Pharisee is like a layperson. They're like a congregant. They all share like a similar theology, which is like this kind of legalistic interpretation of the law. And so if we can identify with them and like try to get into their headspace, essentially what's going on is, and this time Rome has conquered Israel and Judah. So Rome is this like pagan, foreign invader, like not a godly, like they do not worship Yahweh. They don't care. And so there's this belief in specifically within the theology of the scribes and Pharisees, that the reason that these Roman oppressors are here is because Israel has walked away from God's law. So the scribes and the Pharisees, the scribes again are the priests, and the Pharisees are like their congregation. So if in our church we were scribes and Pharisees, I would be a scribe, you guys would be Pharisees. That's kind of the way of it. But they believed wholeheartedly that if they could just get Israel to return to obeying the law, then Yahweh would come just like in Exodus and expel the Roman invaders and restore Israel back to its proper place as a great and powerful nation for the world. And of course, over the centuries, the hundreds and hundreds of years, like that continues to not work because they've got, they were conquered by Assyria, they were conquered by Babylon, they were conquered by Rome. And it's like, no matter how much we follow the law, like God does not seem to be casting out these conquerors. And so they just doubled down and doubled down and doubled down on the legalism. They're like, well, if somebody's beaten half to death, we dare not touch them because we will become ritually unclean. And that's a scribe and a Pharisee kind of like worldview. Something terrible has happened, and that must be God's judgment. And so we dare not touch them because we don't want to, like, if God judged them that way, then we love God and we support what God has done. That's a scribe Pharisee worldview, And now here comes Jesus saying, you hypocrites. You strain out a gnat, a very tiny bug. You strain out a gnat from your drink and you end up swallowing a camel. You missed the whole point. You are whitewashed tombs. You look pretty on the outside. You look clean, but inside you are full of decomposition and human death. He gets real hardcore with these guys. So the question I want to focus on tonight is, when have you seen or been affected by like the rules of the church that have hurt you or hurt someone else, where people trying to adhere to the rules has ended up forsaking love and mercy and faith and grace?
I got one.
Okay.
So I'm going to make it as short and sweet as I can. This person was a volunteer with the youth at a church. Mm-hmm. They've been around as long as I can remember. They were having a birthday party for themselves, not related to the church at all, at their home. And it handed out invitations. You can come or you cannot come. We're not dragging you, And it was a sleepover, yada, yada, yada. Only girls were invited. It was only girls, all that good stuff. Well, there were 2 adults there at one point, but they had a child that was under their care that had special needs. They either decided because that was a boy that he shouldn't be there or he was acting up. I don't remember the whole story, but one of the adults left, right? So it's just the girl who's having the birthday, who is a full-fledged adult, and the however many kids, right? Well, we had the meeting, I don't know, a couple weeks later to prevent sexual abuse and kidnapping and whatever that happens at the church, and they set up all their rules.
It's child and youth protection policy?
Probably. So, and then you have a police officer or somebody come in and talk to everybody and set up all these rules.
We have to do that every 2 years or something.
Yeah. Well, it was time to re-up. And the rule that was being stated was you had to have, whether it was a church event or not, if it was a adult that was working with the youth, there had to be 2. Yeah. And it had to be another adult, if I'm not mistaken, that was part of something, the board or whatever the case may be. Well,
yeah, it's slightly different from. I was a youth director, so I happen to
know some of these things.
Yeah, I happen to know these things. It's different from church to church. It depends on the policy. You had to have at least one fully background checked person, and then if there was one fully background check person, you could have somebody else who was just a volunteer who hadn't been fingerprinted or whatever. And they could, but you always had to have at least 2 adults, and one of them absolutely had to be background checked and
all the good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, again, this rule was not instated when the event happened.
Yeah.
Okay. And you already see where I'm going.
Yeah.
They hung her out to dry. I don't think she was invited to come back to the youth anymore. She chose not to come back. It was bad. And again, it wasn't even something that was known at the time the event occurred. And some parents did come and like pick up their kids, you know, like, again, we didn't drag you out there.
Yeah.
But there was a new rule and we were going to follow it and get you because we could, by golly. And it turned into a whole thing.
God, yeah. What is that? That is a human thing.
And there are so many ways that
Like the upper hand feeling.
I got you.
Yeah, I got you. Like what is up with that?
Yeah, you're wrong, we're right, and we're right, you're wrong, making us more right and you more wrong. It's just like it separates more and more and more, while the wrong person is just being berated and buried. All kinds of crap is just getting thrown while there's no hand held out, or hey, we can fix it, or next time this, or
okay, all right. I'm gonna hold up because I'm tempted to go into the point I want to make ultimately.
Okay.
But do you have?
Mine's quick. I know a specific person that's been drumming for multiple churches for his past 30 years of life.
A friend of yours?
Close friend. Yeah.
A friend?
I see him in the mirror every day. And when I was young and first getting into it, and finally I got to sit on the drums and play with a band in front of people. I was like, day one was yelled at, hey, I don't see spirituality coming out of what you're doing. 15, maybe 14. I don't see any spirituality coming out of what you're doing. You look like you're having fun up there. There's nothing coming out that's helping anyone worship. This person is long dead, but
it's okay to hang them. They're dead.
Yeah, they're gone.
An older person we had contemporary service hadn't just started, but it was still newish at a traditional Lutheran church.
Yeah.
So we've turned our fellowship hall into a worship center. So it's all.
Right.
There's so many implications and it's ramped up to some kid playing now. Like, you can't be in charge of what? So
I think I've shared this before on this in this particular format, but one of my early childhood memories, like church memories in childhood, is because my mom played for the orchestra in the church. We had, we're a big old church. We had traditional and contemporary, and 1,000+ people easily every Sunday morning. And so I was at the church a lot rehearsing for things because I was in drama, I was in choir, And so my mom was rehearsing with the orchestra. I had finished whatever, drama rehearsal or something, came over to the sanctuary, and they were playing something that I am a dancer. Like, I like to dance. I'm not like a great dancer, but I love to dance. Like, when I hear music, it makes me want to move, and I like to move. And so I started dancing down the aisle of the sanctuary, like empty sanctuary, except for this one old church lady in the back who yelled at me. And I'm like, I don't know, 13, Right. And she yelled, it's like the Lord's house is not a place for dancing or something like that. And I remember I was a kid, so I was like, oh, I got in trouble.
Right.
And then I mentioned it to my mom, and my mom, doesn't have the best boundaries in the world. Can be a bit of a tiger mom, and she was like, "Oh, killer!" Oh, who said that to you? And so she went into the pastor's office and was like, what she said to my son and this and that, And then that Sunday morning, the pastor of that church danced down the aisle for the Sunday morning, as the prelude was happening, he danced down the aisle. But that was another one of those examples where, had I not had that positive response,
right,
that could have been a pretty big turning point in my life. I'm like, well, then I don't want to be here.
Yeah,
I can't dance. Then I don't want to be here. What kind of God is this?
Yeah, I guess so many churches or pastors agreed with the lady. And wait, you're exactly right. And who was this? A child? Yeah. No. Yeah. Now we're gonna have something that just ridicules him and makes him feel like.
And it's this weird adherence legalistically to a law that's actually not in Scripture at all. There are plenty of examples of people in Scripture dancing we did a whole live show about it.
But the other side was
when we did adult prom, we did a whole thing about when did Christians become the fun police?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like
it's like an implied governed revenance. Like
Yeah.
you're in an expensive place that's been made with wood.
made with wood and iron.
Yeah, have some kind of revenance or respect.
Revelry.
And be relevant and do not rebel.
Yeah.
Reverence, I think, is the word you were looking
Yeah.
at. So there's something to the human tendency to want to be in and want to exclude others and want to have it, we want to have it figured out and have the answers, even though we don't. And this is kind of my big point, I think, is that ultimately this comes from a point of insecurity. Mm-hmm. Yeah. This comes from every human being at some point. If you get old enough and you have enough awareness of like, oh, everything could go a certain way or not, you start to have a little bit of anxiety of like, I don't know how this could go. Like, I don't know how this could go. Like, the AC could break. The roof could need repair. These are true stories from my real life right now. Like who knows what's going to happen? And there's a way that we can respond to that. There's kind of two basic ways. One is we can lie to ourselves and say that we have it all figured out, and if we do all the right things, then we will be spared from any negative consequences. If I worship God and I love God and I do all the right legalistic things, then my roof will always be functioning, my AC will always be, and I will never have to have a big expensive repair, which of course is delusional and wrong. The other response is a response of faith. It is a response that says, yes, storms are coming. That is going to happen. People are going to try to screw me over in certain ways because human nature and because of sin in the world. Like, it's going to happen. Weather is going to destroy your roof gradually over many years. You are going to have to repair your roof. Things are going to degrade. You're going to need to buy a car at some point if you have a car that you use. You know, like, it's just always going to be that way. Faith says, I will lean on and trust this, not just this life of goodness, but this God of goodness. Like, I will trust that there is some meaning to the madness, and that if I actually throw my heart into the heart of this God, which is a heart of grace and love and mercy, like the heart of God is not legalistic. The heart of God is welcoming and gracious and wants everyone to be included, you know? I mean, certainly not to the point of harm, but to the point of the maximum amount of inclusion and forgiveness as possible, you know? And that is a vulnerable thing to decide to be a part of, because ultimately it's going to beg you to forgive somebody who's harmed you. It's going to call you to be gracious towards somebody that you have the upper hand on. And like, that is a vulnerable place. That's a vulnerable decision. And like, that's the way of this God. And I would argue that has, not only does it have the support of Jesus and like the emphasis of Jesus says this is how we should be, but it also has the upper hand in the end. The way of vulnerability and forgiveness and grace wins out ultimately in the end. And like, that's the promise of our faith. So we're out of time. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen. Good timing.
What does that sound?